This video series is usually just for healers, but I wanted to make a video for you DPS players. Just a few basic concepts and things you could be doing to become a healer's best friend, and stay upright a little bit easier in dungeons. The difference between a DPS that can keep themselves up most of the time versus a DPS that relies entirely on a healer is night and day. So, DPS players, my name is Bowser, let's bolster the healers. The first concept we're going to go over is lethality. Lethality is if something's going to kill you or is going to leave you in a spot where you might immediately die. I know this sounds kind of obvious, but let's go through two examples that'll really showcase how we can mitigate damage as a DPS. In Halls of Infusion's first boss, there's a pulsing AoE bit of damage, followed by a mechanic where two players are selected with a magic debuff, they take damage from the magic debuff, they run out of the group, they drop a bunch of bad on the floor, and then they gotta run out of all of the bad. This is a lot of damage, and on higher tyrannical keys, the ground bad is about as lethal as the pulsing AoE. So what's our best way to proceed? Well, one of the best things you can do is to heal yourself up during or right at the end of the pulsing AoE. Getting your health bar up means the healer has less players to worry about. So if you have an impending victory or an expel harm, a health stone or something that you can use to quickly top your health bar up, you probably should, and that's a great time to use it. Especially if you get targeted by the mechanic, you'll be at full health, which is going to help you survive that a little bit easier. Using a defensive on that mechanic if you're selected is also a good play, because then you're just taking less damage from the ticks, you're taking less damage from the floor stuff, and you'll be able to get out a little bit safer. However, remember, mitigation comes in many forms. You can actually use a movement skill like a teleport or a blink or a speed up or a heroic leap to get out of the bad quicker. So saving your movement skills for a mechanic like that might actually be the best play you can make. However, you wouldn't want to use a defensive necessarily on the pulsing AoE phase unless you had one up frequently and often enough that it didn't matter if you used it here. Because you don't know if you're getting selected for the next mechanic. While a group-wide defensive might be a really good play here, like a Rallying Cry or a Zephyr, it's a really bad play to not have a defensive, get selected by the mechanic 3 times in a row, and simply not have enough mitigation to survive it. The healer might have an external for you, or another way to help you through that scenario, but if you're stressing them out in the healing department 3 times in a row that you got selected, you wasted a defensive. So it's important to consider where's the best place for this defensive, and it's not always obvious. This is something that you'll learn as you run keys and as you get better at realizing, hey, where's that damage coming from? Which brings me to my next example. Brackenhide Hollow. The earlier part of this dungeon has a lot of casters, and they can cast a variety of spells. Some of them you absolutely want to stop, some of them hurt a ton, like the traps that are on the floor, but Witherbolt, I believe is the name of the move, is a move that does a decent amount of damage, especially on high keys, where it can do upwards of 40%. Now, we can't necessarily stop all of these. In fact, it can be impossible to stop them all. They're going to hit your teammates. So one of my recommendations, look at your friends' health bars. How much are you all taking from this spell? Are you losing 20% of your HP? Okay, that means you could take about 4 to 5 of them before it kills you. Are you taking 40% of your health bar? Okay, now you can only really take 2 before it's going to murder you. That's a good little bit of napkin math, a good rule to follow that'll help you better understand, is this going to kill me? But it doesn't just stop there. What if you're getting targeted by 3 of them? Or what if your friendly nearby hunter is getting targeted by 3 of them and you know they're out of defensives? That brings us to another pretty difficult scenario. Well, these mobs can be crowd controlled and interrupted. Mitigation of not letting them cast their spell is some of the best in the game, as well as killing them. Killing them is also great mitigation. So if you can stop their spell cast, you can make it less lethal. So let's say they have 80% of their health bar, but if you can Stormbolt one and then pummel another one, then the hunter's only going to take 1 of these Witherbolts, and that should keep them nice and alive. You could also potentially self-heal between different casts. Let's say one's about to hit you and then the next 2 are going to hit you in a moment. You can self-heal, and then maybe your healer or another friend can get to the other ones and maybe cover you. A defensive here is good as well, but this is a moment I really want to bring up defensive usage. A lot of people press defensives when they're low, and while I get the sentiment, unless you have a defensive that's up a lot of the time, you're probably wasting the defensive. Because in higher level keys, if you're at 20% HP, a 30% DR is probably not going to save you, as most moves are going to kill you at this point. So pressing the defensive beforehand is important. I'd rather you not even press the button than use it poorly, because that sets you up for failure for the next, minute and a half you don't have the move. Whereas if you don't use the move and then die, and then we go to the next pull with you revived and you're immediately targeted by 5 spells, you at least still have your defensive up and will hopefully press it. Okay, moving on to our next point, positioning. I have a whole video about healer positioning, but I want to keep this one very brief for y'all. Always make sure you're in range of the healer. For range players, just remember, who are you dealing with? If it's a monk, being nearby is good because getting close might get you close to the heart, which is a healing buff to receive 8% more healing. So if you're kind of low, that might be a really easy way for you to just jump in and get healed. So if you're off in Narnia, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to get in quickly, and that's not necessarily a position you want to be in. Maybe you're playing with a preservation player and they have to aim. The less aiming they have to do and the less they have to cast to cover you for not being in range, the easier their life is. Even Discipline Priest with its 40-yard range still can struggle if not everyone's getting hit by Atonement with a single Radiance cast. That means that there's 1, 2, or 3 more extra GCDs that need to be pressed before they can start blasting and healing people. You do not want to delay a Disc Priest by 2 to 3 GCDs. That would be terrible. So try to consider their position and always be in range. Melee players, you're not off the hook, because obviously if your healer isn't in range, either you're in trouble or they're in trouble. However, consider frontals and cleaves, moves that could get you killed if you're not standing in the right spot. Or group AoEs, things like the assassins in Vortex Pinnacle. When they attack, they actually hit multiple people. It's an area of effect move technically. So try to be slightly split off from your other melee players so that you risk less overlap for the assassins. And if there's any tanks listening to this is why it's so important to reposition the mobs in an obvious manner so that we know which way they're facing, so that melee healers and DPS can stand up against the enemy's butts and not be in the way of you, and so that you have plenty of places to go if the going gets rough. Positioning beforehand does a lot. It can also help you set up for mechanics so that you have to do less movement or less frantic movement to dodge something that would otherwise be pretty easy if you're in the right spot. My final piece of advice. This one's going to sound obvious, but again, let me cook a little bit here. Keep your eyes up. A lot of players stare at their bars. They're looking more at what button to press next than they are at the packs and what they're doing. I saw this a lot in fighting games, and I need to call it out here because I see WoW players struggle with it too. The more comfortable you can be with your class, your character, and your role, the better. If you can be second nature with all of your spells and abilities, your ability to play this game is going to skyrocket, and so will your damage and everything else you do. Make sure that your bars are conducive to looking down. Make sure that the icons are big, or that you have a weak or a pack, something that's tracking your moves so that you know when to look, where to look, and can quickly bring your eyes back up. Try to press a button and then look back up, and then look down to see what you should do next, and then look back up. It's hard when you're learning a new spec to kind of get the motions of constantly looking back up, but as you get more comfortable, this will become easier. So get those reps in. Maybe practice in the training area in Valdrakken and see how much of your rotation you can do while minimally looking down at your bars. But this is going to help with kicks. This is going to help you know who's being cast on. This is going to tell you what mechanics are coming up. And if you did any of that, right? If you were just paying a little more attention and you're mitigating moves like we talked about in the first section and considering what might be lethal, if 50% of the WoW population did that, I think the healers would never complain. I think the healing complaints would be so few and far between, because even if half the player base did that, our life in dungeon would be so much easier. We can have like one troublemaker who's not doing everything perfectly, but if we have 2 players even attempting to keep themselves upright in a dungeon, it's such a smooth run. So I hope this helped having the healer perspective. I want you all to know I played a lot of DPS to make sure I really understood what all of you dealt with so that I could provide the absolute best information I could without overloading you. But if you do have any questions, hit me up in the comment section. And hey, if you like healing content or any of this theoretical stuff, please get subscribed. It would mean the world to me. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.